All right, well, let's get started. Welcome to the webinar. Appreciate having everyone here. My name is David Gamble, and I'm a principal with McKinley Advisors. And with us today, we have Abe Eshkenazi, who's the CEO of the Association for Supply Chain Management, Bob Chalker, who's the CEO of NACE International, which is Corrosion Engineers. And we have Jay Younger, who's president and CEO of McKinley Advisors. And they've agreed to talk with us today about the new turnaround CEO. We all talk about, these challenging times, but Jay and I were having a conversation with Abe, and he pointed out to us that, every CEO is basically in a turnaround situation right now, one way or another, for most organizations, which brings a unique set of challenges and a new set of demands for leadership and for getting our organizations through this. So we thought it would be good to get a couple folks together and talk through this. And Bob and Abe are very experienced and have a lot to share. And Jay's got a lot of insight from all the work we've done with our clients, as well as running the firm itself. So hopefully we'll be able to give you some good nuggets to take away back to your organizations. If you do have questions, I'm going to try to answer a couple near the end if time allows. So if you just want to throw those into the chat box, I'll be keeping an eye on that and trying to weave some of those in. So with that, why don't I ask Abe to start and just tell us a little bit about the impact that your organization is seeing from this crisis right now. What's going on?
Really unusual for us as an organization. I would say that 2 months ago, I probably had to spend as much time explaining supply chain to everybody as I did about association management. There was a lack of understanding as to what either one of them as a career was for a lot of individuals. That's not the case anymore. Everybody understands supply chain today. If not the benefit, definitely the challenges that we've experienced, either with consumer packaged goods or with food or with other commodities and personal protection equipment, medication, all aspects of supply chain is being exposed today for the benefits as well as for the challenges. Additionally, we've experiencing something significantly different than we've seen in prior disruptions, and using 2008 as a good, sort of parallel example. In that particular case, it was much more focused in terms of the challenge. This is pervasive. Every aspect of our lives is being challenged today, and our members, as well as the general community, now faces a significant change in terms of what is considered normal under our definitions is no longer consistent. There's greater need for association management today like no other. This is the time for associations to step up. Members, the consumers, governments alike are looking for actual information, facts, relevant data. And I think this is an opportunity for associations to step up. And then lastly, this has opened up significant opportunities for us as an organization. We've positioned, hopefully, the opportunities for long-term sustainable investments and responding to the short-term, but understanding this will be done. So the decisions and the actions that we're taking today have a long-term perspective to ensure that we are sustainable as in the long run for our organization. Those are sort of the macro level issues that we've seen.
And at a high level, what are the opportunities you're seeing opening up?
Mergers and acquisitions, new products and services, addressing a workforce that traditionally had not been part of our membership database. We had been focused on senior leadership and entry into supply chain after baccalaureate or master's degree programs. We now are as concerned about entry-level individuals with high school diplomas finding careers and jobs. I think there's a difference here between individuals that are seeking career opportunities versus individuals that just need jobs. And right now, there's a significant population out there that needs retraining and re-entry into the workforce that was not part of our product mix 3 to 4 months ago. It is a significant part of our opportunities in terms of addressing a need, whether it be in retail, food, or pharma. There are a number of associations and industries that have been really hit hard. And there are other organizations, logistics, transportation, distributions, that can't find employees. So this is a significant opportunity for us to reskill a significant part of the workforce, because it's going to be challenging on the backside of this. Additionally, there are other organizations in our our market, in our industry, that we would benefit from collaboration. So we've opened up our collaborative opportunities with other associations, and they take all different forms, from strategic relationships on through merger discussions.
Great, thank you. Bob, why don't I throw it over to you next? What impacts are you seeing at NACE? And maybe you want to talk a little bit about, you were in the midst of a major initiative for the organization when this hit. So maybe share a little bit about that.
Yeah, sure. So first of all, the major initiative you mentioned, we were in the middle and in fact had scheduled a vote for a merger with another organization in our space, a substantially sized merger. It was really bringing together two equal organizations of pretty strong strength. And so that process had been underway for 2 years with a vote scheduled in April. And when this all hit, the other thing is our annual conference was in March. And we had education programs. In fact, we were probably having one of the best years in our history. Things were going extremely well. The conference was set to be a real success, and our education programs were booming. So things were going well, and they just came to a screeching halt as the virus hit. And we had to do some significant pivoting. The good news for us is we've been looking to the future anyways. So we really had strategies and initiatives around going virtual with our education programs or blended learning and moving conferences online, and how we serve our members globally through technical tools. So what it did for us is we went into this very focused, very accelerated process. One of the things that our IT team did a number of years ago is they had prepared us as part of our risk management process to be able to work out of the building remotely. We already had about 20% of our workforce working remotely anyways, maybe 30%. But when you live and work in Houston, severe weather is always a risk. So you have to have a contingency plan for that. And you may recall Hurricane Harvey a couple years ago. We learned a lot through that process and put those lessons to play. So really the pivot of working, we didn't miss much of a beat, except for one thing. All of a sudden we found we had some of our staff that were absolutely overwhelmed with the amount of work that they needed to do. We had other staff that didn't have anything to do because the whole priorities shifted for us. You have a plan, you have a work plan, you have a strategy, 3-year planning, budgets, you have all of that. And now all of a sudden it gets turned upside down. So early on, one of the initiatives was just reassigning people and getting people where they can really add value and get them working on important things. We had a plan to move all of our education programs online or into a blended learning format. It probably would have rolled out over the next 18 to 24 months. That was where we were going. We did it in 3 weeks.
Right.
From an association standpoint, one of the things it did is it cleared the path with members, particularly member leaders and committees, to allow us we didn't have to go through quite the same amount of socialization and bringing them along. We were able to just move forward. So for us, it was just, everything was accelerated very, very quickly. And then dealing with the financial implications of going from really strong revenues to literally nothing coming in for 6 weeks or so. And we're starting to see it come back, but those 6 weeks were pretty tough.
Great, thanks, Bob. So Jay, how's McKinley doing, and what are you seeing sort of across our community as you talk with folks?
Yes, a lot of what has already been mentioned. Just the notion of kind of very choppy demand on different staff members. That's super resonant for us. The notion of accelerating into this, and I wonder again that there's a typical cadence that we all get used to in terms of how new programs come to be, and occasionally I joke, if something is on the fast track in an association, you can probably expect it to get out in the market within 2 or 3 years. Now there's a whole new normal, and that kind of acceleration, we've had to match that pace so that we can provide some value in real time. So I think that while it has been exhausting for the folks who are having to keep that pace, and I honestly don't think it's sustainable forever. There's going to have to be a period of some some recovery from the folks who have been really pushing hard for 8 weeks. I have wondered pretty often during the last couple of months, what if not exactly this cadence, but something resembling this cadence were our normal state? What kind of content, what kind of value, what kind of relevance would we be providing if we were able to, step up and meet that kind of market demand? So all of this has caused us to, to look both inward and outward. And we've been, trying to find that balance of risk and opportunity, which is that spectrum is one that is, for the last 10 years, been mostly over on the opportunity side for most groups. Now there's this giant, ball of risk, and that's playing out every day. And I think, based on what we're hearing, that's going to stay with us for quite some time. So, there's been a lot written. There's been a lot, a lot of conversation about tolerance for risk, particularly with boards. This is going to be a moment where it's going to really land squarely on their laps to try and figure out where do they fall on that spectrum. And I think the groups that are going to do well in the long run are the ones that are going to embrace opportunity. And Abe, it's interesting to hear you mention your pivot from C-suite to basically workforce development, and knowing a little bit about where you were headed, and that you were going up the food chain and trying to get to the real, global supply chain leaders. That work doesn't necessarily have to stop, but you can't fall so in love with your strategy that you miss an opportunity to redirect, right, and go to where the need is. That's really interesting.
But on the pre-conferences, we were chatting a little bit, and one thing we're talking about was uncertainty. With a lot of crises, uncertainty clears pretty quickly. Like, things clarify and you have a better understanding. But just like with timing of when can large meetings happen again, I don't think anyone has an answer to that, right? So no clear answer. And so what's your sense on that? Do you think there's this enduring uncertainty through this? That's a real challenge we have to work with. And what does that mean for leading our organizations?
I'll jump in first. I do think we do have ongoing uncertainty in a big way. And we don't, I know people hate the term new normal, but the reality is we're headed towards a new normal. Mm-hmm. We don't know what that looks like. I think if this drags on for a long time, then yeah, we're going to see a lot of changes. If it's over in the next couple of weeks to a couple of months, maybe we'll go back to some of the old ways of doing things. But I do believe some things that will be different. One is, I think there'll be a much greater acceptance for using technology for communication, networking, education, all the things that we do. And I think there's actually going to be an expectation of that going forward. I think interesting, if you look at our courses, we run education courses in 38 countries. Now we've taken it online. I can't tell you how many countries are now taking advantage of those courses, right? Because they wouldn't have been able, a lot of people wouldn't have been able to participate in a physical activity. They wouldn't have been able to travel. Mm-hmm. I think the other thing that we're going to be looking at is organizations are going to do one of two things. Some are going to crawl back and get really, really conservative because they're going to be afraid of the risk. So they're going to build big reserves. They're going to stop investing in their business. They're going to cut staffs. There's a lot of things that are going to happen. I think others are going to see the opportunity. Abe talked about mergers and acquisitions, or I'll add new product development. We've become very focused on investing in some core technologies that, again, we were on the plan to invest in. This just allowed us to really focus and accelerate it in a short time period. Those things have to continue going forward. So whether it changes or not, I think we've got to put a business model in place that can deal with the variety of changes that are going to come at us. The title of this is the new turnaround CEO. I think one of the elements of a turnaround CEO is they keep their footing no matter what's thrown at them. And we as organizations have to have plans that can handle that kind of turmoil that we may face. Because we don't know when the next edict will come down and say, you can't meet in large groups, or you've got a social distance, or whatever it is. So I don't think it matters to me. It's what are we going to do to deal with whatever's thrown our way?
Well, that's a great segue. Next topic, talking about that turnaround CEO mindset. So Abe, do you want to talk a little bit about that from your perspective? What's different between a normal time CEO versus one who's in a turnaround situation?
And little did you know when you made this little offhanded remark that we were going to rope you into a whole webinar about it. Thanks and sorry, turnaround CEO.
I think that's the McKinley MO. I think yeah, you guys listen well. I think that's the key here. I think that most individuals would, at one point or another, have experience with this, and that is understanding the organizational life cycle. Where is it? Is it in growth? Is it in turnaround? Is it in decline? But I think you need to bring it down to a product level, not just the organizational level, because just piggybacking on what Bob is saying, this presents opportunities for the organization to evaluate the strategic priorities and accelerate, and in some cases, divest themselves of particular products and services. So this presents a significant opportunity to make the necessary changes that you believe will either grow your organization or make it more nimble and agile in the future. What are those characteristics? First, unlike what we all like to hold ourselves accountable for, and that's consensus building, oftentimes in a turnaround, you don't have the opportunity to get as much consensus building as that you'd like. So therefore, communication and information and dissemination is extremely important about who you, advise, who you get input from, and how do you make decisions within the organization. So volunteers, staff, board members don't feel disenfranchised when the decisions are made for the organization. Secondly, it's rapid decision making. Your time horizon is 3 to 6 months. It is not any longer than that. You evaluate the impact of any decision, you amplify those that are working, and then you cut back on those that aren't. This is not the time where you have the luxury of extending programs if they're not working. There are fewer individuals involved in the decision-making process as well. Unfortunately, this is sort of like the metaphor of being a firefighter versus a fire. In a firefighting, prevention, you're talking about the things that you can do to mitigate and reduce the risk and how you respond to it. In an actual fire situation, you need to be very directive to individuals and say, you know what, I need you to leave the building now. And so this has changed in terms of our ability to be very proactive and to prepare. We are now in the midst of a crisis, and this requires immediate decisions to be made. But I think it's also important that with any crisis response, you face major risk of being very short-sighted, and you take routine actions that may not be consistent with your overall strategic plan. So when the crisis unfolds, you want to make sure that the decisions that you're making have short-term impact, but long-term perspective. And that's something that you can maintain in the organization to obviously create value for your organization. Next, transparency and no surprises. As with reduced information that you get to your board or your TAS staff, you have to make sure that you're bringing in the right individuals on the need-to-know basis at appropriate times. This is not the time for your board or for you to change your style in terms of your communication. You have to maintain that same communication style that you've had, but more importantly, you have to walk the talk. And so if you are communicating about actions or decisions, you have to make sure that you're consistent with your staff. You have to make consistency with your volunteers. Lastly, and I think this is the one that probably stresses a lot of us out, is scenarios. Understanding what potential outcomes are going to, or potential scenarios you're going to face, and what will you do if. And so this requires a lot of internal planning on what opportunities and what challenges that you're going to face in the short term, medium, and the long term, and identifying what actions you're going to take. So this prepares you for the next step in the organization's evolution and your evolution as well. This is a significant opportunity for your organization to evaluate your strategic plan and again, double down on those activities that create value, pull back on those that don't create value for your organization and for your members, and then look for ways to expand it. If you're hesitant and you are reticent to make the changes, There are others that will do it, whether in the tax-exempt community or in the for-profit community right now. There are a whole host of opportunities and organizations that are willing to take advantage of it. There was a discussion a little bit before about the reserves. This is exactly why we built up reserves. It's exactly for these types of opportunities or these types of crises to sustain your organization or to take advantage of your organization's, the opportunities. We can get into the communication with the board and the staff as we go through the discussion, but the style that you need to maintain is a much more focused and a much more real-time decision-making process, short-term impact with a long-term perspective.
David, can I add to that? Because a couple of things he said, and I'll put some examples in place. One of the things we did there's a couple of things we did I think really helped us get through this. Abe mentioned continue your communication style, and we did, but we accelerated it and more frequent. So I've had 3 meetings with my board, each an hour and a half long, each with specific decisions that needed to be made around our conference, et cetera. I have now a regular Tuesday finance committee meeting where that committee would meet 3 times a year. We're meeting every week, obviously an important committee to know where we are. But one of the things I did with them, and I'm so thankful I did it, not because of brilliance, but just it seemed to make sense, was I made it really clear and asked to make sure we understood what I'm authorized to do and what they want me to come back to them for. So for example, we got agreement on how much of the reserves I could use without having to come back to the finance committee. We got agreement on what things that are typically delegated to the board for decisions could the board now give to us. So we had a lot of decisions around annual conference that had to be made. Some of those, by our governance, would go to the board, like the date and time of the conference. Doesn't make sense why that's the case, but that's our case. Well, I got them to delegate that to me because we had to renegotiate a new date and time. So just being really clear and frequent, but also recognizing that they're dealing with their own crisis. So tying them up for 8 hours is a waste of their time. Make it short, make it concise, but probably much more frequent than you would have done prior.
Bob, you're bringing up a really good point. Let me just add on one thing, and that is the relationship that you have with your board leadership. Whether it's a chair or whether a leadership team, you need to make sure that you and that group clearly understands the rules of engagement. And as Bob was pointing out, it will reduce so much stress for the organization. And I can just pound down one topic here. This is not the time to change your culture or the way that your board works. This is not the time to experiment with a different, board role responsibility for the organization. A lot of the culture has already been developed in your organization. You may want to take this opportunity to recast the type of relationship that you have with your board, but this isn't really the time for major changes to your board, communication style or to their role and responsibility. As Bob was pointing out, they're dealing with a lot of their own personal issues in the organization, and where you don't have full-time access to your employees, imagine how difficult it is for a volunteer to get a clear understanding of all the issues that you're facing on a day in, day out basis.
How was that conversation with your board? So this hit, you realize the ramifications of it. You've got the board you've got. And I think your point on you can't change your culture in the moment, So, how did those initial conversations go? Did your boards align with you very quickly on the severity of this and the need for action, or were there challenging conversations? How did that go for both of you?
Bob, why don't you kick it?
Mine went great, but that didn't just happen overnight. I've spent years investing in the relationship with my board and my executive committee. And Ed brings up a good point. Having that, for us, it's an executive committee, not just a chair. And having strong relationships with them. So, the payoff comes when you're spending that extra time explaining to them why you do things and getting to good decision-making and training your board and investing in good processes and good systems and good governance. This is when it pays off. So for me, it actually went really, really well. And I mean, our board had to make 3 huge decisions in a short time period. They had to vote on a merger. They had to postpone our annual conference, And then they had to make the decision to not go forward with our annual conference. Every one of those three decisions in and themselves were massive.
Mm-hmm.
They had to work through this. And so, tons of information, staying in touch with people, phone calls, independent to individuals going into the meeting to make sure they have all the information they need. Having a very organized approach, because all three of those meetings were done virtually.
Mm-hmm.
Having a very organized approach to how you do it. But it's the foundation that you've built the years going into this that makes it successful. It's not what I did 10 minutes before the meeting.
Mm-hmm.
A really good point. For us, it was first with my board chair and then with the leadership team of the organization. And our organization had developed contingency plans well before this. So we've been doing this for about 5 or 6 years now in terms of what would happen if. But it was always on the downside of a recession. But what would a recession cause and how would we respond to it? So we both had downside and upside, contingency plans for the organization. If things are much worse or if things are much better, what do we do as an organization? So to Bob's point, this wasn't obviously the magnitude of this is much different than anybody could have ever predicted. But more importantly, we were prepared to have the conversation. And so this enabled us to get right to the key decisions. First, do we affirm the strategic priorities of the organization? Are they consistent with where the issues that we're facing today and that we're facing in the long run? Secondly, do you stay the course or do you make course corrections? And to Bob's point, at what level do you need to engage the board on decision making for an annual conference or eliminating a particular product or service or shifting completely to one online format? These are a lot of the discussion points that you need to have with your board. And as Bob pointed out, it's much better if you had developed those types of relationships with the board in the past, but it's not impossible to do it now. I think you can set an environment where you demonstrate your leadership to the board as well as to the leadership team and ensure that they understand their role and responsibility to you and to the organization. And it was much easier for us to have that conversation. We have already had one board meeting. It was a 4-hour meeting instead of an 8-hour meeting. It was virtual. We anticipate to have our next board meetings, 2 of them for the rest of the year, virtual as well. So we're finding a different way to establish the communication and the decision-making for the organization so it doesn't hinder us. Going back to the discussion we were having about a turnaround CEO, you need to be able to rapidly make decisions in today's environment. You can't sit and wait. The market is not waiting for you. It's going to move well beyond you. More importantly, it's the culture of the organization really, to Bob's point, has really sustained us as an organization that our hallmark is no surprises. We don't surprise staff, we don't surprise the board, and we don't expect it the other way as well. And so that has enabled us to have open and honest communications with the board. However, there are issues still that are almost hard to have conversations about. Reductions in force. That's a very difficult conversation to have with the board because this impacts not only current operations, but future operations as well. So the decisions that in the beginning on the communication was fairly easy. We're getting into a lot of very difficult conversations today about the future of the organization, products, services, value creation for our members and for the industry. So the challenges we face now are significantly different than we faced 2 months ago on the onset of this disruption.
Yeah, good point. Jay, any thoughts you have on that board relationship?
I would go right back to the idea of uncertainty and how that really makes what Abe just talked about even harder, right? Because when you start to approach these topics that are going to have long-term impact or could potentially threaten your ability to pull off the turnaround, again, trying to understand where their risk and opportunity thresholds lie. The question of reserves. Yes, we've got them. Most organizations came into this in a very solid place with regard to their balance sheets. The historical rule of thumb of 50% of operating budget Over the last decade, most groups have been well above that. So again, that's in the good news column. We came into this situation with some assets that we could deploy. How much, over what duration is the board going to be comfortable with? So when given a choice between, hey, we can take 10, 20, 30, 40, 50% of our reserves to see us through this period of time. Well, when there's no end date, or the end date is so cloudy, it's tough to figure out, with conviction that you've got your turnaround plan ready, right? Or that it's going to be effective. So, hey, board, we want to draw down reserves. This is what they're there for. That'll provide continuity in staffing. It'll have us, possibly to avoid a reduction in force. We're not going to cut into bone, so we can come out stronger on the other side. When is the other side going to start? And what products and services are going to drag us into that new normal? That's why I think it's a really dynamic situation at the moment, is a lot of those key variables are still really difficult to wrestle to the ground. If we knew that, 3 months, we need to invest $2 million over 3 months, and then we think demand is going to return. All bets are off right now. So I'm reminded of the old VUCA acronym, volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. Usually it's one of those variables at a time that define a situation. We have them all right now. And so it's like, okay. I think that's, again, back to the idea of the trust that you've built with your boards over time. You're gonna cash in on all of that hard work over a decade, because you're gonna have a whole series of these high impact discussions and decisions to make for the foreseeable future. So I think it's going to take resilience. I think it's going to take trust and transparency and all those factors that these guys have named so far.
So with the three of you as CEOs of your organizations, after this crisis hit, how have you been focusing your time, and how do you expect that to change over the coming months, as best you can predict?
Yeah, I'll start and just quickly go back to what Abe said, which is kind of firefighter analogy. As CEOs, I think we're counseled, and we have a responsibility to think longer term. Typically we spend, I don't know what you guys would say, 75% of our time, 80% of our time thinking about not this week or this month, but a year from now, 2 years from now. Spend a lot of time in planning, spend a lot of time thinking about the future and what we need to do to be ready. When this happened, it was just a very jarring feeling for me, at least, to go from that kind of mindset and posture to what has to happen today, what has to happen by the end of today, and then by the end of this week. And the answer was quite a lot, right? Quite a lot has to happen. And got to give huge kudos to the team at McKinley, who are really the ones that got all the work done. And I think that, again, our job as CEOs in this moment is really around leadership and trying to make sure that our teams have enough information to perform well, that they have enough motivation to stay in the fight, and that we are sensitive and attuned to the very real implications that this is having on people's stamina, their mentality, their psychology. And so at this point, 2 months in, where my head is now focused is on how do we give people some sort of break? How do we responsibly allow for that recovery to start to take place for our individuals, so that they can then re-engage for the next round? Because I think it's going to be this kind of perpetual cycle of remotivation, re-energizing folks, and getting them on to the next set of tasks that probably for the again, the near term, we're going to be in that what are we doing this week kind of mind frame.
Thanks, Jay. How about you, Bob?
For me, it's really been 3 or 4 areas. It's dealing with the finances of the organization and making sure we have what we need to live up to our commitment. We believe in our staff greatly. We believe our staff is extremely important, and we've worked very hard to build a strong staff. So the last thing I want to do is use staff as the way that we're going to get through this, meaning we made a commitment. We're going to do everything we can not to do furloughs. not to do pay cuts, et cetera. We had to do a little bit. We were eligible, we're a C3, so we were eligible for the payroll protection plan, and we applied for that. So one big area of mine was finances.
Mm-hmm.
The second area obviously was the merger. I couldn't not stop working on that. And there was a vote scheduled, and there was other things that needed to happen. So that was important. And then the third for me was our conference, making a decision on our conference. Everything else sort of fell away. And thankfully, I do have a strong staff, and they've been able to pick up a lot of the other pieces. But David, I think you said earlier about becoming very, very focused in crisis management. That's what I did. I had to identify what are those 3 or 4 key things that I could focus on and give them each the significant effort and not worry about other things. One of my personal promises to myself is I respond to emails in 24 hours. Doesn't matter where they come from, who they are. Well, I'll tell you what, I got an inbox full of unresponded to emails, which makes me uncomfortable,
Right.
But they don't fit the priorities I need to have today. So it really did change the way I focus my time and commit my time, and to those 4 drivers for us.
How about you, Abe?
And I should have said one more. Also, staff. One of the things when we went virtual, we do a weekly all-staff meeting, and then, Abe, I stole this from you, actually. I have a coffee with Bob, which we've been doing for several years since you do lunch with Abe. We do coffee with Bob, which is 5 or 6 people randomly selected from the organization just to sit and talk. Well, we started doing those virtually, and I was doing, instead of 1 a week, I was doing 1 every day during early transition, so that every employee had the opportunity for me to check in with them and see how they're doing.
That's good.
That's where communication is key, and I'm going to sort of amplify a couple of points here. First, on the people side, being a supply chain organization, one of the most critical supplies that we have for any organization, whether it be a supply chain or an association or otherwise, is people. This is a people business that we're in, and we serve people. We develop people, and I think this is where it starts and stops for us, and that is keeping individuals informed. Whether they're your members, whether they're your staff, volunteers, whoever it may be, of the changing situation, and ensuring that they have the appropriate information. So communication channels, to Bob's point, whether it is skip level meetings or direct webinars, there are a number of different modalities to amplify and extend the message that you have for the various stakeholders that you have. Also, you're explaining a whole range of personal and professional questions that we never were prepared to even address before. It's a collective experience that we're all having right now, but no 2 are the same. No 2 individuals are going through the same issue right now. So you need to be a little bit more in tune to your audience and the message that they need to hear from you. And then as important as that is keeping your staff focused, engaged, and optimistic. This is a stress situation for almost all organizations right now. My communication, as I'm sure everybody else's, has expanded and enhanced. Not only who I talk to, but how often I talk to individuals right now. And so this goes back to, walking the talk and ensuring that your communication is consistent, because that's the last thing that you need to do right now is lose your credibility as a leader for your organization, whether to the general public or to your staff. I think that's important. I've never been busier in my life, and this is a significant opportunity for us to make a difference in people's lives. And I think that's why we got into the association business to begin with, is to make a difference in people's lives. This provides a wonderful opportunity to make a difference.
David, I want to add something. One of the things that I think you have to do in this type of a situation is you have to think about what is it that I, as the CEO, need to be involved in, and that nobody else can do, or nobody can do it better than I can. So I'll give you an example. I saw one of the questions that popped up, and it prompted me, was about what are you doing for your staff, keeping them safe, especially in the return to work scenario. Well, I have a lot of opinions about what to do, but I have a chief talent officer, and we have a manager of human resources who are much more capable of designing how we come back to staff than I am. So they're checking in with me and they're keeping me informed, but I'm letting them run with it. I don't need to have my fingers into what that looks like. I need to have awareness, but they can do the design work. So going through what has to be accomplished and really asking yourself, are you the person that has to be involved in this? Or is there somebody else who can do it and possibly even do it better than you would be able to? That really helps you get to the things that are important and need your attention.
I think CEOs who struggle with delegation are just getting crushed right now if they can't let go of things. So it's an important skill to have. So I wanted to shift a little bit to talking about opportunity. And we've been talking a lot about uncertainty. What are your guys' thoughts on for CEOs who are looking for that North Star for the organization to navigate through this, find those new opportunities might be opening up? What kinds of questions should they be asking? Where should they be looking in general? How would you approach that? And I know it's like kind of indistinct depending on the organization. It's going to vary a lot, but what are your thoughts there as far as general guidance, if any? Or just talk about yourself, whatever works.
I'll jump in. I think you need to look at what your members need right now. What do they need? And can you provide it? Give an example. So we're a technical association. 90% of what we do, probably 95%, is around technical activities. If you look at our courses, our papers, our conferences, it's around the science and engineering and technical aspects. But when the CARES Act came out, and we have a lot of our members are small, either consultants or small proprietors, 8, 10 people. When the CARES Act came out, there was a lot of confusion. There's still a lot of confusion, but there was a lot of confusion. So one of our team had the idea and said, hey, we've got resources through ASAE to get to lawyers and accountants who maybe would have some expertise. So we did a webinar, brought in two attorneys and an accountant, and did a webinar on how to navigate the CARES Act. We had over 300 people on the call at that time. It was our most popular webinar to that date. And I am personally still getting emails from attendees thanking me because they were able to get the payroll protection plan because what they learned in that webinar. That is completely outside of our normal scope and mission, but it taught us something. Our members are hungry for business knowledge and business skills. So maybe there's a place for us to serve that role in the future. And that's one of the things we're going to be looking at in the future. Should we do more of that? Is there opportunities? So really listen to your members and what do they need? What are they looking for? I think that's your North Star.
What I can add is that you have to take a look at your risk profile as an organization. I think a lot of organizations that had depended on a single event or a single product are recognizing that their risk profile is it's much higher than they probably would have preferred. And I think this is exposing a lot of the sort of underlying financial conditions that we saw, or that were, a lot of organizations are experiencing. It's in a go-go economy. I think it hid a lot of the challenges that we had in membership and in events. And Bob was pointing out his transformation to digital. I'll give you our example. We anticipated our content, our participant guides, the learning materials that individuals use to sit for the exam. It's probably about 25% of our revenue right now. And we're about a $40 million organization. In 2016, 2017, we had anticipated by 2023, we would be out of the content business, that content would be free, that we needed to position our organization to be able to compete with the Stanfords, the McKinseys, a lot of organizations that were disseminating a lot of content for free. And so the question was, can we maintain that value while others are providing it for free? So we had planned by 2023 at the latest to be out of participant guides and find a different way to monetize the content that we have. In less than 2 months, we are out of participant guides. We no longer have books that we sell to individuals. It is online only. You can access it on any technology and in any platform, and you don't need books. You don't need to go to a center to test. So in less than 2 months, we've accelerated our investment in the digital transformation for our organization. Additionally, we're seeing other organizations, as I indicated just a moment ago, that had a single event that they're not going to run not only this year, but it brings into question next year as well, as to whether we'll be able to congregate without a vaccine or a treatment identified. So this presented an opportunity for us to collaborate with a number of organizations on embedding our content within their organization, so that we would do a joint revenue opportunity or joint revenue share. Or are there opportunities for us to invest deeper into the organization and potentially either merge or absorb their operations into our company, and more importantly, reinvest in their assets, which are, again, product rationalization. So this for us, unfortunately, has elevated supply chain in every industry as a opportunity, and this has presented significant opportunities. But I do want to point out, we're impacted as the industries are impacted right now. So we represent almost every industry that has a supply chain, and there's very few that don't. So we're seeing the kinds of impact to their industries to ours as well. But I will say the one major change that we've seen this year from the recession that we saw in 2008, 2009, that was a demand shift. That was a demand sort of curtailing across the globe. This is not a demand issue. This is a holistic disruption to not only the way that we produce, but the way that we deliver and the way that we consume. And so this has impacted every aspect of our lives. And it presents a challenge on how do we prepare ourselves for the next disruption. It will not look like this. But more importantly, how agile, how responsive and resilient are we as an industry to respond to the different changes and to the different challenges, whether they be a pandemic or weather-related or biohazard. These disruptions are going to come. And so the question that we need to answer for our organization, as any association does, what is it that's core to us? What is it that differentiates our product and our services from any other company? And how do we maintain that value proposition, not only today, but in the future?
Yeah.
Great, thank you.
I'll add too, a business continuity plan has served us extremely well, right? So I mentioned about the hurricane. I don't know what the disruption is going to come, but you're going to have disruptions. And if you haven't really thought out and what you need, now's the time to be thinking about it for the next one. It's probably too late for this one, but the business continuity plan we had in place allowed us to do some of the pivoting and not lose any traction in the process. Well, others who are in our space who do education, we're still trying to figure out how to offer how to even get their staffs up and working. We were already putting new courses out in the marketplace, so we were able to be there early. I want to add one other thing. So a lot of good things in a lot of organizations have happened over the last 8 weeks. A lot of CEOs I talked to, they accelerated everything we did here. The question I challenge to think about is, how are you going to make the good things stick? Because we know the association world is, it's hard to make change. And there's this pull back to the old ways, the traditions, the conservative. I've already got a couple people talking about, well, when we get back to classroom teaching, well, guess what? We're probably never going back to fully classroom teaching. But I would encourage you, you really got to think about how are you going to plant those roots in those things that you've done so that you don't find yourself a year from now doing it the old way. And we all know that happens. We've seen it happen many times.
Early on in this, I saw a headline that it cracked me up. It said, "Associations learning how to work remotely the hard way." Everyone had to figure it out on the fly. There's one organization I was talking to. They had planned to do a dry run of everyone working remotely for a day, anticipating this was going to come. And then the shutdown happened 3 days before the dry run. Like things just, if you remember, things were moving fast. As this thing hit, right? And it really accelerated. So yeah, I think so, like nimbleness, being able to flex your organization a lot faster. And then that always intersects with governance, right? So, how can your leaders be able to flex with you? And that's been a constant theme throughout this. And I think, going back, reflecting on some of the how you guys described your relationship with your boards, you had a really strong relationship with your boards already in place. which allowed you to have effective decision-making moments with them. Without that, you still could have gotten there, but it would have been a lot harder, right? Right. Taking a bigger lift.
I think, David, just real quick, jump in on Bob's point about our kind of collective short-term memory in the association community and beyond. I would totally agree that this is a great opportunity to document some of what we're learning and why we shouldn't return to the way we used to do things before. There's no reason to have a 2.5-day board meeting 4 times a year, right? I mean, there's just no defensible reason for that. And it, you know, when you get underneath that, a lot of it, I believe, is driven by the desire for volunteer leaders to go on trips. And I hate to say it, but we can't afford to do that anymore. And the decision making that you're able to do in 4 hours now, Abe, when it used to take you 8 hours, I feel like there needs to be at the appropriate moment, which is not right now, kind of a collective, recognition that we don't have the luxury of a ton of waste in the system anymore. That can be on the product level. I totally agree. This is a good time to rationalize and right-size the portfolio. We got to stop doing some things, and around the process. So product on one side, process on the other. Yep. We can be a lot better. We can work a lot smarter. It's just going to require some courage and some conviction to probably, when things start to return to normal, people will be like, oh yeah, can't wait for that classroom instruction, Bob. Can't wait for that 3-day board meeting, Abe, where we go to like some remote place. Guys, we can't do that, right?
Well, I'm going to go to questions from our attendees. So if you haven't asked one yet, you want to throw it in there in the chat. Here's your moment. But before we do that, wanted to ask, especially for Bob and Abe, in a turnaround situation, what's going to get you fired? And should you even worry about that?
Stay the course.
Mm-hmm.
Don't change anything. Don't respond. Don't think that anything has changed, and just go about your business. And I do want to point something out. When and if we're getting back to some sense of normalcy, and again, we really don't know when and how that is going to come back, but you have to empathize with the volunteers that are coming back to your board. If you haven't responded, believe me, their organizations have gone through significant changes. And they're going to come back to a board or an organization, and they're going to say, well, wait a second, here's how it affected me. How's it affecting you? And the collective experience of your board members, I think you need to make sure that you empathize and understand what they've gone through, because they're bringing in a lot of different perspectives into a board meeting that they didn't have in the past. I'll give you an example. We had our board meeting, as I indicated, just a couple of weeks ago. As we were going around, it was our first board meeting of the year, brand new board that was just impaneled in January. So we had 3 new board members, and we were going around and they were introducing themselves, for our first board meeting. And we were talking specifically about the impact on the pandemic. And one board member goes, we've had staff reductions, we've had pay cuts. We're looking at another round of reductions coming fairly soon. We don't know if we can maintain this business. And we're just hoping to tread water right now until we can get out of this. The next board member goes, we can't find enough employees. We're paying stay bonuses. We're paying sign-on bonuses. He was in logistics, distribution, and warehousing. She was in a manufacturing setting. The experiences they're bringing to the table, to the board meeting, are diametrically opposed. Mm-hmm. And one is looking at this is fantastic, and the other is looking at this is the death of my company, mm-hmm. and a significant humanitarian challenge. It's the challenges that you're going to be facing at the board level. You're going to have to be much more attuned to what your board members are bringing back to your organization, and how you present and how you communicate what your organization has gone through. So first, you need to empathize with your board members to make sure that you understand the challenges they go through. But more importantly, you got to empathize with your membership. You have to understand what the collective impact to your industry is, and have been at least taking the necessary steps. Short of that, being closed-minded to the impact that it's having on your key stakeholders, I think is a significant disconnect. If you can't be in tune to them, during this crisis, then you're missing a significant part of your role and responsibility.
Yeah.
David, the only thing I would add is I think you answered the question for me in your next statement. If you're leading from fear, from a position of fear, you're going to end up getting fired. I mean, because you're not doing the right things for the organization. In the end, if you're doing the right things for the organization, you're going to be in a good place. But if you're leading from being afraid or fear, whether it's fear of your board or fear of the virus or fear of the economic situation, that's not a good place to be leading from.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you both. Got a question here I wanted to throw your way in our last few minutes. I'll summarize it briefly. You just got hired. You're coming in as the new CEO and you're handed the keys and just had to cancel your annual meeting and 40% of your revenue evaporated. What do you do? So, you're entering at school.
Hold on. Let me get my COO on the phone who just left 3 weeks ago to take on a new organization that he can't meet his employees. The conference has been canceled, and congratulations, you're the new CEO.
The good news is it's all uphill from here, right?
This has got to be one of the more difficult transitions for any leader coming into a situation where they cannot meet their employees. I think this new normal of these calls have created a very formal communication channel. We're missing the informal communication channel that we have with our staff and our teams. Yeah. And so meetings start on time, they end on time, and we move on, and you got 10 to 15 calls a day. And unfortunately, it is a staccato. It is just a rapid succession of meetings that you go into, and you don't spend the time, unfortunately, with that, getting to know and work with individuals. The challenge also is for new board members. We talked about staff. And so I've got a new board chair who started in January, and thank God for this board chair, the right guy at the right time. And then one of our conversations last week, and he said to me, chances are I will not preside over a face-to-face board meeting. I will not have an annual conference or any events this year. And I started to think about it from his perspective. This is a highly sought after recognition, as it is with all other organizations, being recognized as the leader. The impact on him in terms of the relationship with the board has now changed. And so he was walking into a situation where life was good. We were a go-go organization. Everything looked fantastic. And in less than, literally 3 months, we're looking at a very different environment. So, understanding his situation as well as the new board members, as well as new staff, and trying to develop the culture. And this is, I'm going to go back to Bob's original point. Culture got you to where you need to be, and now you need to find a way to maintain that, even though you're not in face-to-face. And so I believe culture will carry our organization into the future, albeit it's a heck of a lot harder today to maintain it.
Yeah, thank you. So we're in the last couple of minutes. I wanted to offer you each a chance for a closing thought. And Bob, I know you've got a hard stop, so I'll let you go first so you can get on your next meeting.
My thought and what I would encourage, and we didn't talk about this, but it has been incredibly valuable to me through this process. To have a network of peers, of other CEOs who are running associations, and use and leverage that network. I've got one through CES, I've got one through ASAE, and I'm using both of those networks highly. Regular communication, even they've gone to regular every 2 weeks type check-ins and meetings. But picking up the phone and being able to call another CEO and say, what are you doing with this? And just to sanity check yourself, or make sure that your ideas are making sense. The cool thing about the world we're in is we all do similar work, but for the most part don't compete with each other. And that's really rare. In most industries, if you're in that industry doing that kind of work, you've got competitors, so you can't have it. We're blessed. We can have these kind of really tough conversations or share information and get strong advice. So mine is get your network. If you don't have it, go build it. If you have it, use it.
Thank you. Jay?
Yeah, that was actually one of the things I was going to reference about the what will get you fired kind of question, which is what you don't want to do is go it alone. And the strength of our community that Bob just references is I also believe one of the things that's going to carry us through. As it relates to the turnaround notion, I think that this requires great stamina. We have to be sweating the details in order to maintain the energy, the enthusiasm, the mental acuity, in order to operate in this environment, probably for longer than a typical turnaround might take. Because typically, again, you start to come down off of that bottom and you can start to see some things emerge. That will happen, but I think it's going to take us comparatively longer, and there are going to be more of us that are all going through it together. It kind of becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. Again, a lot of these calls, how you doing? It's getting old, man. It's getting old. So again, I think that we need to be attentive to our own mental and physical health. I need that it all starts with that. And I think because we're in it for a comparatively long slog, and we got to try and bring our best selves every day. And when you're not, that's a variable though, because you're not going to be at 100% every day. And I think you got to give yourself permission. If today for me is a C+, I'm going to give my very best C+, and I'm not going to beat myself up about the fact that I didn't really have it the way that I had it last Tuesday. So we're all human, and we got to again kind of do our best. There's a really good book called The Four Agreements. I don't know if any of you have read it, but that's one of them. It's like, I give my best every day, and as long as I can do that, I'll be able to wake up the next day and maybe do a little better.
Thanks, Jay. All right, Abe.
I think the key points here are the industry that we are in, the association industry. I can think of no better time to demonstrate why associations matter than today. Individuals, governments, companies are looking for relevant, accurate information and facts. And this is where we can stand out as an industry to be that voice of record and to demonstrate not only our capabilities, but our responsiveness in arguably one of the worst situations that most of us have ever been in. I can think of no better time for associations to stand up and be counted than today and to make a difference. And I couldn't be more proud of the response that the association industry has developed here. More importantly, I think we can use this as a stepping stone to create career opportunities for individuals. We still need more individuals coming into our industry, and more importantly, to demonstrate that we can make a difference in people's lives and that we can respond appropriately during one of the worst situations ever. I think this is why associations exist, is exactly for time periods like this, where we can stand up and represent a greater good. And hopefully we'll see this on the backside, and it'll be a memory fairly soon. But this is the time for associations to stand up and be counted. This is time for us to be heard.
Great. Thank you, Ed. Well, I'd like to thank Abe, Bob, and Jay for joining us today. Thank you so much for your time. And thanks to all of you for showing up here and listening, and for all the work you're doing. Echoing what the three of them just said, this is important work. It's a call to service right now. And we thank you for what you're doing.
You too, David. Great job.
Thanks, David. Thanks, Bob.
Okay, thank you all.
Thanks, Jay.
Take
Take care, all.
Take care.